All right, shout out to everybody here. Free Seed Day CoNNect, hosted at New England Hydro Elevated Equipment Supply. Round of applause for everybody for making it out today. Thank you, guys. We are super stoked to be here. We've got a lot of great energy. It's been amazing to be out here on the East Coast rocking the CoNNect community event. Shout out to Masonic Smoker for bringing the Free Seed Day out here. All the love, all the packs. Shout out to all the breeders that contributed to all the heat getting blessed today. Thank you, guys. So our first panel discussion between Dan and Edgar was about breeding practices, some things to avoid, some things to think about when you're making your selections, grow techniques. Now this 2 o'clock panel that we're about to dive into is not just on growing, guys. We're gonna start talking about the business of growing, the strategies, the SKU rationalization, the challenges of commercial cultivation, which we've all worked under these certain challenges, and that's why we're here. We're going to share knowledge. That's the point of this panel discussion, is to share knowledge and all the different challenges that we've come through. And again, guys, this is an engaging conversation, so we're going to have some dialogue. We want to open up for Q&A. We've got some legends up on this panel today, so I'm honored to be able to share the stage with these guys, have a great discussion, most importantly, level each other up. So without further ado, the Steering Success Navigating Commercial Cultivation Challenges panel. Let's go ahead and start off with our introductions, please, right here at the stage.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ramsey Nubani. My company's JR CropTech. We've been working in the industry for a combined 40-plus years. It's been a lot of fun getting to see legalization, the new challenges with commercial scale cultivation, but happy to be here and getting to talk with everybody.
Thank you, Ramsey. Welcome.
Yeah, hi, I'm Craig Yendrick. I do R&D for Gen Hydroponics, and really excited to be here. This is the second event that I've been involved with. Had some, great dialogue, great questions, and one of the things I'm really, really proud of is being able to share some of the experiences that we've had to help grow the entire industry, make everybody better. So even though we may be competitors, we all want you all to be successful, and so happy to be here to be part of that again.
That's exactly right. We are here to level each other up.
Colleagues, not competitors.
Colleagues, exactly. Community over competition. Yes. That's what the CoNNect's all about, perspective and growing up and leveling up. Whether you grow indoor or outdoor, we're all here for the plant and providing the best genetic expression and the healthiest version of that plant with sustainable solutions behind it.
I'm Noah. I'm with Aroya. I'm one of their cultivation advisors for the Midwest and East Coast, and I've been with the company for about 4 years now.
Hey guys, I'm Joe Cimino. I'm a cultivator. I've been cultivating at scale for about 15 years on and off. Originally was doing most of the work out in California, but have just launched a facility out here in Massachusetts, and we're growing your Highness. So
that's it. Brand partner for your Highness. Got some killer genetics out here. You guys are crushing. Well, round of applause for our please. So we had an awesome conversation the other day when we got all together just to kind of start talking about, hey, what are the things we want to address? What are the things that we want to help level the community up with? And honestly, I wish we would have recorded that conversation because that was some good shit going on in there. The takeaways on these thought bubbles up here that you see on the screen are some of the key ideas, some of the key topics that we did cover. And I thought it'd be a great idea if we could just kind of start rerunning some of these things. But before we even dive into this, I think there's a big misconception of crop steering and what crop steering even is. And if I can call on Ramsey on this one, because you hit it on the head, man, and like just the delivery that you had on what crop steering even is. If you can just please lead us off.
So I guess my definition, or the definition that a lot of us go by, is the active, and the keyword is active, manipulation of a crop to achieve a desired outcome through the manipulation of lighting, environment, irrigation, the plant touch, so like how you prune a plant, planting density, substrate size. These are all elements that you can adjust that would lead into crop steering. So it's not just irrigation or a word, it's the active engagement with your crop to achieve a desired outcome. So the simple act of growing an indoor environment using supplemental lighting is quote unquote crop steering, because you're growing a plant with purpose. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize they're crop steering right now. So the perfect example is you trigger your plants to flower with short days. That's crop steering, right? If you use VPD, if you're monitoring the temperature and humidity at certain stages, you want to keep it lower to be keep the plants happy when they're young. That's crop steering. In my world with general hydroponics, a lot of the feed charts we've built that into. So you may not know you're doing it, but as large-scale growers might be working with FloraPro, and throughout the flower, we're kind of tapering off the nitrogen for you, and that's crop steering. So we're trying to, like Ramsey said, deliberately do something for the plants, or to trigger or stimulate something for the plants that you want out of the grow, and it's a very, very layered approach.
Ramsey, how many P1s do I need for lemon cherry gelato? So, and thank you guys for diving into that, because ultimately it comes back to having the right tools, having the right limitations within your facilities, understanding what those limitations of the facility might be. Joe, why don't you tell us about some of those things in a facility that you've had to overcome or adjust to?
I think going into a lot of different facilities, Ramsey and I have talked about this in the past, you start to encounter not every facility was built the same or designed the same. So you start to run into issues where in certain facilities you may have irrigation limitations. Other facilities you may not kind of have that tight environment control that you may want, and you can't necessarily run the substrate you want to run. So a lot of it starts to come, it's this tweaking between genetics, what the system can handle. Again, there may not be enough DHU, enough AC. You can't fight physics. I think a lot of people are always in this race to try and push out numbers, and the reality is you only have enough DHU. You're going to have to cut plant count. You're going to have to adjust and kind of overcome what is, there in terms of facility and system design.
Keyword there, cut back, right? Scale back from what your facility can actually do. And I think a lot of people think more plants, more yield. Well, not necessarily. There's a lot of things that go into that factor, which is why we want to be able to confidently stand up here and say we can probably grow more yield. Not probably, but we can grow more yield with less plants under that 4x4 or that square foot that you're actually growing under. And again, there's many ways to grow this plant, right? We are all here because we have our own touch. We're our recipe approach, and a lot of that comes back with quality inputs, a lot of different things that the chef wants to touch on that specific platter. So, I love knowing that there's a bunch of different genetics that are creating a wave, but if you're not growing them, then you're probably not paying your bills very effectively. So, especially with the candy wave right now, we have to respect it, right? It's not going anywhere. Now, small bud trait candies require a lot of steering or influence to be able to achieve commercial yield, and the commercial viability with these things is fucking tough. Let's be real. They're not easy to grow. To achieve quality with yield is very difficult. Now, Noah, let's talk a little bit about that in controls, right? You've seen plenty of candies around, growing around different facilities with the Aroya. Talk a little bit about how using the right tools can help people really achieve the success that they're looking for.
Yeah, so the number one thing I see with people when they're trying to dial in any sort of irrigation strategy is they want to go super aggressive right away. They want to try to throw in as many irrigation vents as possible, and a lot of times they end up having negative effects onto that cultivar, and then start blaming the crop steering doesn't work. It's not a advisable thing to tell people. So then it's working our way back down to say a nice baseline of an irrigation strategy where we're not throwing irrigation or P2 after P2 on that cultivar all day long, and then ultimately they'll be able to kind of narrow down which way do I want to steer this cultivar, and then you put that in the bank. Okay, we documented that information. How can we repeat that round after round going forward?
You cannot manage without measurements, right? So being able to reference the things that you did so that you can actually make a better decision in the future to get the desired outcome of achieving that. So, I think you hit it on the head, though. A lot of people think that something doesn't work because they just cut a bunch of corners, like Ramsey touched on. It's not just irrigation strategy. It's lighting. It's environmental.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that when you come into a facility in commercial scale, what do we need to have control of? We need to have control of the environment. We're fucked if we don't. You know, like foundationally, we have light control. That's usually like step one of things. But climate control is such a key component and often overlooked. Redundancy is everything. If I'm looking at building a new facility, I told the group we keep it simple. We use carrier or train units, 5 tons. Why? Because their parts are readily available. When equipment fails, how fast we're able to respond to it is how quick we're going back on track and keeping everything else in motion. So one of the things that we look at when coming into a facility is what's the low-hanging fruit of equipment that needs maintenance to, so that way we could either get it working or do we replace that equipment with something better and more efficient to get us across the finish line. Because I think a lot of the times people are trying to make something work that hasn't worked before, and they kind of get stuck in this hamster wheel versus saying, okay, like it's time to step away from that and approach it a different way. And the quicker you make that decision in a commercial cultivation, the better results we're going to get. I always find it important to have on speed dial a maintenance guy. It's such an overlooked thing, but people forget that this equipment's running 24/7. So it's going to break. I don't care if it's a brand new grow. We need to have maintenance done regularly on this equipment to get it across the finish line. It's a marathon, not a sprint, so it can't work one time. It has to work every time. And that's probably been, you know, when you said what are like one of the challenges that you come into, and he touched on climate, that's been the biggest challenge, getting good controls in place with the right equipment. Once you have that, we could start even talking about manipulating things and getting to better results. Like a lot of the time, we are so hyper focused on how much am I doing in this phase. You forget that the goal of this is to grow a successful crop and focus on healthy plants. Like what can we do right now to get the plants healthy? And then let's focus on how do we improve from there. But we have to catch a baseline. And so I think a lot of people get overwhelmed and forget what their baseline is. You know, just because we're scaling up doesn't mean that the principles and the core that we've learned go away. We now just have the tools to monitor and see what's happening real time so we can make those good decisions. You know, those like kind of elevated thoughts like, all right, is everything in check? Yes? Okay, let's go to the next thing. What else could be going on? Because that's basically our job. Our job is playing parent, adult, doctor to something that can't speak to you. So you're constantly trying to read what's going on with that room through the analytics and keep it in range of what your target is, so that way you're producing the same product over and over again.
It's funny too, I think, especially as you kind of start to take a step back and look at things at a bigger scale, how much of it is around like system design and facility maintenance, and it's just managing the systems for the environment. It's, you know, again, generally speaking, as long as you're, you know, within, you know, relatively within range, right? Like things are going to be in pretty good shape, but it's when you have that downtime, when you have stuff that has a lot of failure points, you know, that's where you run into all these problems.
Well, I was just going to add, I mean, I agree with both of what you're saying. With so much sort of diversity of systems that are out there, there's not really a one-size-fits-all plan, right? And so think about from a cultivator's point of view, you need to know what temperatures and humidities, you need to know what light levels, you need to know, you know, your irrigation strategy, and all those things are going to be dictated by the overarching, you know, mechanicals in your room. So it's really, you know, we got a lot of people asking us like, what's the one size fits all? What's the answer? And it really isn't. And I think to kind of piggyback on what you're saying is that there's a bit of an iterative process where you have to start with something safe and then kind of grow into that expert level of cultivation.
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of the job becomes about, you know, trying to keep things in balance, and when things get out of balance, how do we adjust? Because again, you know, inevitably things are going to happen. You lose dehues, you lose ACs, you know, breakers fail, all sorts of things happen. You've got to kind of adjust in the middle of a run and kind of on the fly, and it's always about, again, just what are we going to tweak to kind of try and keep it where we want it to be?
That also comes to prevention, integrated pest management, having clean lines, sterile, cleaning your batch tanks on a weekly basis. There's so many things that we should be doing to prevent the issues. And I don't think people talk enough about the good things that are being done to maintain the quality of the environment, the quality of the operation, the health of the plants. You said it perfectly, Ramsey. We're trying to grow healthy plants. That is our goal. Keep the plants healthy. So what about the silent killer like pathogens? Hops like thyroid, fusarium, pythium, the things that common commercial cultivators are dealing with today. What are some things that you guys can talk about on how you protect that?
Start working with tissue culture labs. I mean, that's one of the best things you can do in this industry, as things are constantly circling around, and it's a newer industry, and as facilities are getting bigger and bigger, they're starting to see things that they've never seen before. So either work with a tissue culture lab or build one in-house.
I would love to respectfully challenge you on this, because what if the genetics in demand right now are not ready in TC until 12 months from now?
Then working with hopefully a lab or a nursery that has connected to a tissue culture lab that can hopefully provide you clones at a relatively faster rate.
Couldn't agree more. In a perfect world, that is the case, right? Work with a reputable cultivator or a reputable nursery. Work with the lab that's already been hunting these genetics so that by the time they actually get out and get popular, they're there. But what about like the current pheno hunt? People want proprietary genetics.
I think the key with this is having purpose-built rooms. So in my opinion, a lot of pathogens come from the propagation. We were talking about this earlier. Having a dedicated propagation room allows me to control the climate, so we have less damping off and mold and just bacteria present after the initial start of the plant's life. So that I find has a big key to it. High rotation of moms. So if you are doing propagation within house, we try and keep our plant age down, sub 3 months. Rotation, we clone and kill. It's a just cheap way to keep ahead of things and keep it a little bit more sterile. We really manage plant count as a total. It's important that the sign doesn't hit me in the head. But I find that it's really important that keeping a clean facility, I think that the more we clean the facility, the better we will be as a cultivation. Less is more. So plant counts down. Cleaning your sprayer. Aspergillus, one of the main things I found that cause aspergillus is your pressure, your foliar sprayer from not cleaning it. A lot of these things, even though they're made to prohibit these diseases, if you don't clean your sprayer routinely, then you might just be spraying bacteria all over your plants. Another one that causes aspergillus is your predator bugs. The medium in which you release predator bugs, if that gets on your plants, some of these sachets have dog food. I only learned this through somebody else, but I was taught that they feed them, that's a source of protein, and that has aspergillus on itself. So you're releasing predator bugs onto your plants that might be contracting it. So I think that the key with all these things is being an educated cultivator, taking the time to learn. I always like sitting around people smarter than myself. One of the guys is Armando. I used to pick that guy's brain all the time. I still give thanks to him for sharing knowledge. But I think hanging out with a lot of other growers and people that are experts in their field, there's so much free knowledge out there. I tell people all the time, like, easy game, contact one of these companies, Cooper. You call them, they'll sit on the phone with you for hours teaching you about IPM and like what bugs do they release, how they even like have their hatchery set up and stuff like that, because it does take an effect for a crop like ours. So part of aspergillus is just, again, keeping a clean environment. I think that's number one for me, is just managing that.
I always appreciate getting to talk to other cultivators, because if you grow over a long enough time frame, you're going to encounter just about every problem. And it's always great to be able to be like, hey, I encountered this problem. This is kind of how I thought about it or approached it, and you have a different solution, different mindset. And again, it's always this kind of ever-evolving game. I think of we're always learning and kind of finding new sources of contamination, whether it be a sprayer or, hey, I had to fail on this way because it was in my AC or whatever it was. It's always, I think it's this evolution of learning to a big extent.
Yeah, I think that's the whole point of being colleagues. is that when you get to work with other great people that care about what you're doing, you elevate one another by being in that network, in that community. And I think that if we continue to share and help each other, we will all build and become better versions of what we're trying to achieve. And I think that's the goal within this, is sharing knowledge so we could all succeed.
I'll just add, if you look at the major ways that you can, or the major pillars that you build into an IPM program, most crops have had decades more of genetic improvement. So cannabis really doesn't have genetics on their favor yet, so it will come. The active ingredients that are approved for use on cannabis are very, very few and far between. So in terms of chemical sprays, there's just not a lot of options available. So what that really leaves are these cultivation practices, keeping your equipment sterile, but also don't forget just kind of like the physical barriers, like you mentioned, keeping dedicated rooms, but limit the amount of people into your room. One improvement that I've seen that I really like and would hopefully get some traction is just shorter crop cycles. Like instead of a 4-week veg, you're maybe flipping to flower a lot sooner.
14-day and flip.
So that you finish before some of these diseases can take over and ruin your crop.
I think that's one of the fundamental issues with genetics in cannabis, is that they haven't been hunted exclusively for pest, resistance or disease resistance, and it's, kind of selections made where people are growing in a garage or a basement, not so much in a facility with a controlled environment that's kind of, we're actually testing the genetics based on the environment they're going to be running, and, we're looking for commercial viability, right? It's one of the big things we always talk about.
Always talking about selection within your facility, right? If you're selecting for your farm, make it fit your program.
I learned this term recently, genetic selection through pressure. Do you guys know what that is? Yes, no? Well, if you don't, it's the idea of running genetics in your facility, keeping everything that you do normally what you do, and then choosing the genetics that perform the best through that. A lot of us do it by nature, but it's something that is key to know, because if you ran more than one room, which I guess a lot of you guys have, and girls, people, you realize that not every genetic's going to perform the same at each one of your locations. So that concept was really pushed upon me early in my career, because I was like a brick wall to it at the beginning. I was like, what do you mean? If I have everything set the same, I should be able to do the same things. But not true.
But to me, that's the most exciting part about the industry, is because you can take the same 100 seeds that I have in your facility, and we're going to pick different things, because of those environmental differences. The ones that pop for you are going to be different from the ones that pop for me, and that's where you get the exciting diversity that an event like this, where we have all these
fertilizer, everything. It's like that. That's the terroir that kind of comes from choosing a genetic in your facility. That's the beauty of that.
It's always amazing seeing the exact same clone grown, different media, different nutrients, different environment, and even kind of what, how the cultivator kind of approaches it, what kind of special techniques or what they do different, and how dramatically different that flower can end up.
Well, that's crop steering. So you top your plant, I don't top mine. It's a completely different type of outcome.
Yeah, and something I see all the time is everyone wants to run what's popular out there in the market, and they try to bring it into their facility, and they want to finish in 8 weeks. Well, it's not finishing in 8 weeks, sorry. There's nothing that we could do to get it to shoring up. It still wants to go that extra week and a half. And yeah, sorry, like you have to find something that works for your facility. Doesn't matter.
So the genetic selection through pressure, and I'm glad that, shout out to Dan at Rebel Grown that talked about this earlier, working with reputable breeders that actually breed in the terroirs or the climates that are mold resistant, or that may be specific to maybe some of your farm challenges are. Maybe you want to work with some of those kinds of breeders. So appreciate you, Dan. That was a great panel discussion earlier. Now, this topic down here on the bottom left here, aggressive drybacks. This is a fascinating one because it's pretty prolific. And when you start talking about risk versus reward, aggressive drybacks is, what would you say some of the things are that people think that an aggressive dryback can bring in terms of quality?
Yeah, we've done those tests ourselves, and it worked. It's the reason why people do it is because it works. You can get your potency up. The test we did, it's 2-3% in total cannabinoids. So that's an attractive way that people can use crop steering with controlling the soil moisture to get that benefit they might be looking at. My perspective from, you talk about risk reward, you're then not now starting to approach the teetering on the edge of crop failure. And so as long as you're aware, you miss maybe one irrigation event after you go real hard on a dry back, it could be game over. And so just full disclosure what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah, I guess also pressure testing things. Like, I think the key with the drybacks is the rising substrate EC. So I always, working with Josh and getting to be involved with people, again, that I believe are smarter than myself, we find that it's not the actual dryback that is creating the more generative crop, it's the increase in substrate EC that's putting root pressure on the plants and causing that stress. So we really notice that the manipulation of your substrate at EC, specifically at field capacity, so once you've gotten your substrate completely hydrated, the value of that EC number in the medium at any given time has a huge impact on how vegetative or generative the plant will respond. The lower that substrate EC, the more vegetative a response, the higher that substrate EC, the more generative. And so what we found, and just through working with a lot of people, we've learned that a plant really doesn't feel water stress till basically when it's at wilting point. So we're talking like sub 7%. What's wilting point, Armando, and Rockwell? 7%? Yeah, 7%. In cocoa, we're talking 11%, 10%. So you got to get it really, really, really dry before it would ever feel any sort of stress from that action. So what I kind of notice, and again, this is just what I observe as I'm running a facility, doesn't mean I'm correct. I'm just sharing what my views are after observation, is that the time from your last irrigation to your next irrigation and the effect of the climbing EC and the substrate during that duration of time has the biggest effect on how the plant will respond. So if you were wanting to steer more generatively, going to a shorter irrigation window and drying back to a point that your substrate EC climbs day over day, meaning not just during the dry back that it spikes, but the day over day at field capacity is increasing, that would be the greatest generative effect. So, a lot of what we're doing is we keep certain things in balance. So maybe you are getting generative cues by having a big dry back, but if you're now irrigating a ton of times, you'll get a very vegetative response from that. So I think the key with all these things is keeping everything in balance when you're approaching it, and understanding kind of some of the nuances that might be happening that will be counterproductive for what you're trying to achieve. So I think I was mentioning this other day, which I found was pretty interesting when talking to other growers, is that increasing your VPD could be a generative and could be a vegetative response. And what I mean by that is if you increase your VPD, you will get a bigger dry back. So that could be a generative cue. But if you bump your VPD up too much where now you're irrigating really frequently, that's now a vegetative cue, because every irrigation is an active vegetative statement. So the more frequently you irrigate in the day, the more vegetative your response of your plants. So if you have to irrigate, during a large window of time and you wanted a generative plant, the simple act of spreading your irrigations apart to further time and irrigating less frequently could create a more generative response on that crop. Sorry if I rambled a little bit there.
I always like getting to hear it because, it's kind of always, I always get to, I always appreciate somebody else's take on it, because one of the things I feel like I've kind of noticed most recently is, kind of less is more with EC. I always used to kind of lean and try and target these higher EC values. And more recently, I've really noticed that I didn't need to kind of go as extreme as I had before. And again, it's I think people are so trying to look at these exact numbers, and really more so it's about trends. Am I trending up? Am I trending down? And then again, how is it actually corresponding to plant health and what I'm actually deeming to be good quality. I think that's the biggest disconnect. People are like, it's like I'm running the right value. It's like, well, there's other stuff going on that you're not necessarily taking into account that, that's having other factors on it.
CO2's been a big one lately.
Well, I was just going to mention there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? And so if think about what you're putting the plant for and why. All right, all of these stresses, dryback stress by managing water moisture, soil moisture, you're trying to create a signal in the plant that says, "Oh shit, I'm about to die," right? And because it's a feminized plant, it's not been fertilized, and it wants to reproduce, right? And so what's happening inside the plant is it's basically struggling to go through that process, waiting for pollen to come, fertilize it so it can make a seed. You're not going to let that happen, and so the plant the whole time is now putting all of its remaining resources into developing that flower, making the most sense to attract pollinators, whatever it can do to try and make sure it's successful for our next generation. But there's lots of ways to do that. You can cut the CO2. That's gonna starve the plant of its source carbon, and so it's gonna go through those similar sorts of last gasps to try and allocate resources to the regenerative parts of the plant. So a lot of growers are doing this stacked approach where they're going to pair multiple ways of crop steering to achieve that similar benefit.
So based off that point, how does Rockwell versus cocoa, not that one's better than the other, but how does this take in consideration with that point?
Well, I mean, with assuming the same substrate volume, the Rockwell is going to have more porosity. It's going to hold, it's the less amount of water. The roots that we've seen like the root zone is going to be more filled in a core substrate. So all that saying, they're different substrates. They're going to need to be managed differently, but you can still achieve the same goal with either one.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to avoid wilting point. I mean, if we're drying so far that we're causing these plants to wilt, like we're causing damage for the rest of the flower cycle. So that's the number one thing is like, if your dryback is so big and you're getting wilting, that you're drying out way too much. And then now going back into like the substrate, so using something like a Rockwell, well, we all know it has it holds so much water, and if you dry back too far past that threshold, it's never going to rehydrate again. And that's usually around like 40-ish%, or on the safe side, around 40%. So if you're drying past that part and you're now trying to have to feed all day long just to keep up with it, what is that doing to your plants? Like, where is that pushing them on the scale of that vegetative generative cycle? And you'll see it usually right away. Like, your plants will start to elongated bud sizes, some foxtailing, or even some regrowth.
Any other thoughts on that?
I guess, yeah, the only thought I would add is that choosing a substrate has an end effect on your overall crop in the sense that mistakes happen. So I like redundancy, and sometimes choosing a substrate that allows you to have some redundancy in terms of being able to rehydrate with your irrigation system versus having to go back through and hand watering is key. Everybody's got to do what works best for you. There's no one right answer, but each one has an effect. The goal that I have when choosing a substrate is which one's the most uniform. So I want consistent results. So if one time it has a field capacity of 40% and the next time it's got one of 60%, it's probably not going to be a substrate I choose. Like, I really want consistency in the product. So that way, when I run a crop in it, I could quickly eliminate that of being one of the issues, or at least know how it's going to perform. So I think that's always key, is just choose things that work for you. Substrate size, keep in mind of like how many gallons of substrate you have per square foot. So start to manage it that way. If you have 2-gallon plants and you increase 2-gallon pots with a low plant count, and you increase plant count, maybe it's a good idea to reduce substrate size because then with such a high volume of substrate, you might not get a similar dry back as when you had a lower plant count. So those are all kind of balancing acts. So if you increase plant count, usually decrease substrate size.
The water balance technique, right? Increase or decrease. And that's, man, that was a great conversation that we had in New York with Kirk and Kevin.
You know, I think it's all about balancing plant size with substrate, and then to your point, plant load. And you know, you mentioned the other day, it's what was the volume of a substrate per meter squared. You know, again, I think again, people are just looking at stuff in a vacuum where it's so much of it's strain dependent, facility dependent. You know, do I have the ability, enough drippers in this zone or whatever it may be.
I want to pause and open up for any questions from the audience. What questions do you guys have?
David Strain?
I will say, okay, my man, what do we got? One sec, I'm going to come on your right. Name and where you're from.
Yeah, my name is Mike Xanatakis. I'm from Drayton, Massachusetts. My question would be, like, how do you guys go about dealing with viruses like HLVD at scale when you have to do like an unfortunate situation like a full shutdown to reset because you're dealing with optimal pressure?
Look, I think a big part of it is just having SOPs that are kind of designed and you operate to try and minimize those kind of potential failure points. You start with clean mother stock, always bringing in fresh mother stock. It's moms that are, only 90 to 120 days, that only so many cuttings are taken off of them. I think it's proper phytosanitation, sanitizing shears in between touching mom stock. I think that's where you kind of have to start. Because without that, it doesn't matter if you have it or don't have it. It's about trying to stop the spreading of it within your facility.
Well said, Joe. And I would love to emphasize the cultural aspect, the internal team that are touching the plants. What are their behaviors? Do they understand the raw chicken technique, right? If you touch raw chicken, you're not going to eat right after that. Treat it like raw chicken. If you touch one plant, you could potentially infect that next plant. So talk to your team about how pathogens spread. HLV in particular, right? It's vector transmission, right? If you have dirty shears. I actually ran a test a couple years ago to see how long HLV would stay on my propagation tray. I had a known infected clone, batch of clones actually, and I sterilized it with something called Phizan 20, right? It was not a viricide like Virkon or hypochlorous acid. It was just, something that was being used for a long time in the propagation space. For 2 weeks, after I washed it with Phizan, for 2 weeks, that viroid was still present after I did a swab on that tray, and it still tested hot for hops laden. So that just goes to show the viroid is present in many ways. So when you're walking around and talking to your team about touching these plants, you are a vector. So cultural practices, it's a great question. Thank you, Mike, for asking that, because not enough people talk about preventing pathogens through just us. The plants, yes, start with clean mom stock, work with TC Labs, get your genetics that you've hunted into culture. That's great, but a lot of times the market's not going to wait for you to get stuff out of TC. It's more of a tool, right? So test your mom stock also. There's plenty of labs out there. Shout out to My Flora DNA. They've got $9 samples for whatever pathogen it is. So there's no excuses. What other questions do we have back here? All right, let's keep rocking.
Sergio.
We got one back here. My man, name where you're from.
Hey, my name is Robin from Florida. So I've mainly been doing a little bit of outside grow, but I'm going to have to switch to indoors. I know making sure I look at VPD is going to definitely be a big one because I'm always, soaking my plants, putting teas and stuff like that. Is there any big things to definitely look out in that environment where it's going to be on the hotter and more humid side whenever you're going to be growing indoors in like a small space, maybe like a 2x4 or 4 plant count?
I think the key always is good insulation. It's going to go a really long way, especially growing in a hot, humid environment like that. Dehumidification, proper airflow, but yeah, the biggest key that I would say is insulation. It's proven time and time again, the more insulated your facility, the better climate control you have. In your situation, try and use taller ceilings if possible. The taller your ceilings, the better control you'll have at plant height.
I think the ultimate goal is to always try and minimize swings, right? So, make sure you try and size equipment that's, not too big, not too small for whatever it is, whatever size space.
It's a great point, Joe. Minimizing the swings, because it takes, I think, up to 6 hours for the stomata to open and less than 60 seconds for it to close. Minimize your swings.
In an indoor environment, within 30 minutes, the stomata are fully opened. Yeah. You see it in the rate of transpiration in the substrate data. You'll see a very sharp drop in water content showing active transpiration. And that happens as fast as 30 minutes after lights come on. You'll definitely see it within the first hour, especially if you're not ramping lights up or anything like that. I just go full bore.
I have a question about first irrigation event and how long the spacing of that first irrigation event is. Do we have any tips for the cultivators that when you should be making that first irrigation event happen? Is that referred to as P0 or P3?
The technical answer is that first irrigation is supposed to have an active transpiration. That's like the technical goal. But I just choose a start time. I don't know about y'all. I do it 1 hour after lights come on. That's my first irrigation. I don't change that.
I've seen it. It's like 1 to 2 hours after lights on. You can literally see the slope of the water content start to change, and that
Yeah,
that's
2
really
hours is like the max, but usually I'm between 1 and 2. 90% of the times I'm starting 1 hour after lights come on, because my lights are 100% within most of the facilities are LEDs, so like they go full bore right away. Climate jumps up pretty fast. Yeah, I just see that they're drying back at a steeper rate, ready to go.
Yeah, exactly the same. 1 to 2 hours after lights on. Pretty similar.
It's funny you say the full bore. I've had lots of heated discussions about that approach, and plants are really good at acclimating themselves. They know what to expect. So if they know the lights are going to turn on at 6 a.m., by 5:45 they are ready for it, whether you gently turn the lights on or you full bore. Same things for irrigation, though. Like, as long as you are consistent day after day, they get acclimated to anticipate when that moisture or light is coming, and they'll be fine after a 2 or 3 day acclimation period. Then you're good.
Yeah, I mean, I just match DLI veg to flower, and I'm going. I just run. There's not much of I don't acclimate too much in my book of things. It's just 0 to 100. Let's go. I think the key always is for me is making sure VPD is in check. Like, as long as you're not going from a low VPD to a high VPD, you're pretty much ready to go right away. Like, your plant should charge all the way through. I think the key with all that is like the nuance of when do you turn humidification off and when do you turn dehumidification on. That's always like the fun dance that I go. But yeah, I think with irrigation events, I set one time. I've always let it go as like the start time. Lights full 100% within the minutes of coming on. I don't ramp them up or anything like that. That's at least how I do it. Again, doesn't mean it's correct. It's just what works for my facilities.
Yeah, I've never really done the ramp up or ramp down. I mean, one of the things I'll do to definitely help with nighttime environmental swings is to set my nighttime environment like a half hour before the lights go off. So
That is definitely a good pro tip.
yeah, it definitely helps minimize.
I think another place that could be helpful is you have multiple grow rooms. You want to stagger so everything doesn't come on at once. So that's kind of a smart way to do it too.
What are the thoughts or questions you guys have for each other?
I think the thing I've been most fascinated by right now is like what's driving everybody's decision as to a genetic to run. I think that candy gas, yes, there's so many different versions of it, but when you're going through and pheno hunting a lot of these seeds nowadays, like what are real benchmarkers? One of them for me, for instance, is the 65 days. It really's got to be a cutoff on that number. If it doesn't have color and finished well enough, that's my no, I can't run it. But is there anything else? Like, is everybody prohibited in that fashion, or is it just
look? It's testing. It's what is your yield coming back? It's how quickly is it selling? How much is it selling for? Ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what is keeping the lights on. So, and it's just. There's only so much I think you can kind of push against what the market wants. You may have the best thing in the world, but if the market doesn't want it, isn't, paying, doesn't see the value, you're just kind of losing a fight.
Do you see the same genetics you run in California run over here and sell the same, or are you finding that you have to run different varieties over there to accommodate that market versus here?
Look, I mean, I think there's the licensed market and then there's the traditional market. There's definitely significant overlap between but between the two markets. But I think what's driving that is you have a different customer. A lot of the customers that go into rec stores, legal stores, may not kind of have access, or, we were talking about this the other day. It's like, who do you know on the forums, back with genetics at certain times? It was just kind of the scene or how stuff was shared. And I think the people that are going into rec stores are looking for different things than, not necessarily chasing hype or flavor the same way. Traditional, more so is it sativa indica? How's it testing? Is it this general terp profile versus, I think, the whole candy gas thing?
We're starting to see some people consider setting up rooms differently. So for example, based on finish height, so making sure you're matching your room specs with the architecture of the plant. So you're not growing a short plant with lights hung too high so they can't get the enough light, and that's gonna help with cycle time. That's gonna help with quality. So just if you have something that you want to grow, there could be some subtle changes with mounting height that could open up to grow more diversity in your operation.
I got another good one. How do you guys make a decision on what fertigation system to use?
I like to keep
injectors, like dosers.
Honestly, the fewest failure points for me, the better. Like, I just have generally liters or Grundfos where it's going to be a simple pressure sensing head. Like, it's either going to work or it's not. And, like I said, man, it's just the fewer failure points for me, the better. I'm using a dosatron right now.
Yes.
But, there's not necessarily huge variations in the recipe. A little bit, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm all about keeping things as simple as possible. Less variables, less things that could happen, easier to train people. And that's also another thing I'm looking for is what type of support and maybe education are they going to help you or provide with that type of dosing system.
Yeah, I think the key to me is accessibility to parts. So dosers, we used to do Netafim machines, and when we had issues on site somewhere, we would have to be there to fix the issue, or we'd be on the phone with the person on site for hours. So we quickly learned that keep things simple went a really long way and made our lives a lot easier. And I also surprisingly didn't know until I had so many doser systems that you have to do an O-ring change on those once a year. You guys all know that? Yeah. Yeah, we had a backflow issue, and we were like, what the fuck's going on here? And yeah, the simple thing though, you learn a lot by running things, and once you learn that changing those O-rings and making sure everything's sealed properly, dosers work great. It's my favorite product to use. I could walk anybody through how to use them within minutes, and so that was really nice. It's easy to work on. Almost every hydro store has parts for that, so yeah, that to me I agree. Simplicity is key.
A lot of it's maintenance too, like how much maintenance is required to keep the system up. How complicated is that maintenance? Like the 3G systems, dude, the maintenance on that, I feel like for the Netflix, there's like a lot of it that goes into it, and they're not necessarily easy machines. So
Yeah, I think everything nowadays is I'm looking for simplicity. The simpler it is, I think everybody tries to make stuff overly complicated. You know, I walk into some irrigation rooms and there's like 1,000 valves and they could do 10 dosing programs. And I'm like, for what? You know, like I really run one ratio start to finish. The only thing I do that's special is lower feed EC to like a 1.5 for the last week to 2 weeks. Same recipe though. Like, you know, fertilizers I think are over complicated at times. People make them over complicated. A most common question I get is, what do you add to your fertilizer? Nothing. We don't. We really don't. Like, I don't add anything. I add microbes. You know, I think that the fertilizer plays a key piece, but us as manufacturers, we do a really good job of finding a really well-balanced formula for y'all. I think biostimulants are great to add, but you don't really have to add a whole lot more than that. That's about it. I don't know, Joe, do you add anything to?
I'm running JR. It's just hypochlorous acid, and then it's just I think just adjusting really nitrogen via cal chloride, cal nitrate.
Curious about your biostimulant. Are you foliaring those? Or are you,
Foliar.
okay.
I use Super Thrive. Like, isn't oldie a good? I don't know. Like, I laugh when I say it because it's like comical. It's been around forever, but that's my jam. I like using Super Thrive. It's a simple, good product. It smells like ass. Like, definitely don't be smelling that. Like, I'll give you the first. But yeah, no, it works really well though. Like, I just use it a foliar. I use it right after transplant, and it helps my plants. You know, I just see them.
Are you doing it like the first 3 weeks after?
I do it right after like my rooting cuttings. When we transplant them, we'll spray it, and then we'll spray it again day one of flower, and then that's it.
Cool.
We really, you know, it's a biostimulant, so it helps the plants handle stress. Regalia is another great product out there, but I've tried a ton of different stuff, but keeping it, you know, very, very simple has been what works for us. Like, I don't try and overcomplicate the SOP.
And a few applications go a long way early in that stage too.
Yeah, really, it doesn't take much. I think everybody thinks that they have to do like an excessive amounts of stuff. I've seen people read a label and it'll be like, spray once a week. All right, I'm going to do it 3 times. No, it doesn't work like that. Like, it's not adding more is going to make your plants better. Your plants got to go through the natural process. And so we're aiding them along, or kind of like a shepherd to them. Like, all right, let's keep them going along the best way. Let's make sure they're fed everything to achieve the best. But overdoing it, it's kind of like working out. You're going to injure yourself.
100%. Like, coming from a synthetic cultivation perspective, adding in these biostimulants just totally bring out the terps, the plant health, the vigor, the post-processing, the overall shelf life of the flower by incorporating biostimulants has been night and day. I'm new to biostimulant production, and I think that was one of the biggest takeaways was just the overall terpenes, and just you walk into the room and it fucking smacks you in the face.
I mean,
they're loud.
Mycorrhiza is such a key product. I think there doesn't need to be there isn't a line drawn in the sand that if you use synthetic fertilizers, you can't be incorporating some sort of organics and beneficials to your crop. I think the idea is, how do we do it methodically and something that can be reproduced? So don't put something through your drip irrigation that's going to clog the shit out of it. Like, let's think about this logically. Is that drench worth the manual labor that you're putting in? Or can you do it at a strategic point, like when you have a ton of small plants grouped together? Like, that's the optimum time to do it, not after they've been spread out. So I think thinking about things and adding them at the right times goes a really long way.
100% agree. And go back to the equipment, hearing you guys talk about different, whether it's a Dosatron or an H.E. Anderson, whatever it might be, we're trying to run tractors, right? You need parts to be accessible. You need to be able to fix that shit on the spot because you can't have downtime. So when we start throwing on the 20-inch rims with spinners and all these extra radios that may not work out in the middle of the field, you could run into some problems. So I think that's another thing that, I've learned through the CoNNect community, and shout out to Kevin Crouch, Powerhouse. He's shown us that adding biostimulants through your drip lines can be done effectively at scale with proper SOPs on a weekly schedule. Flush valves, using something like High Clean that's it's going to break down and descale without killing your rhizosphere and your root zone. It's pretty incredible to start to see those kinds of tools at application, because again, the finished flowers fucking smokes. It's terpy, it's tasty. That's what I'm enjoying. It's just that
test
overall.
results and results in general is what should direct us in making a decision. Like as you trial things, if it adds a benefit, it should be measurable. It should not just be like holistic. It should not be like, oh, I think it did something. No, let's look at real numbers that drive it. And there's so many different ways to get there. I think everybody, the uniqueness in you as a grower is what allows you to be in this market space. So as you learn things, accommodate it to how you are as a grower. So like if you like irrigating only 3 times a day, just because you put a drip irrigation system in doesn't mean you have to change that. It just means that now you don't have to walk around and manually do it 3 times a day. So the idea of automating is not to conform to one system of doing things. It's to automate what you're currently doing so you could scale up as a grower and have some free time. Because that was always my goal with automation, was I wanted time to do other things besides service my plants. Like I want to be able to look at other details. I also want to have a life outside of cultivating. So I think that was the whole idea of automating and looking at what are we choosing to do. Again, it's not just to conform to one style as growing.
I was going to ask that the number one question that we get asked regularly is about automation, remote sensing, sensors in the room that basically do it for you. I was just curious how integrated your grow is with that. And if it is, have you found a system that works? And we've evaluated a number of different, and
there's no perfect
just
system.
don't think it's there. The technology in terms of sensors is there. They can detect what's happening at the plant level. Where what I'd like to see the innovation happen is to be able to take that information and automatically adjust the temperature in the room, automatically give a pulse, and it's. I think a lot of people are disappointed when they find out that's not the case with some of these systems yet.
There are a lot of huge leaps and bounds that companies have made in terms of that sector here in our industry. Again, scale is important. So there are products like Priva that do this for you, but we don't. Our scale grow doesn't accommodate that. So the hard part is there's a lot of innovation that needs to be done to the current control systems to get to that point, and it is happening. Like this market space is growing. There's more and more money into it. I really think though that it's just going to be a matter of time for us to keep evolving with our technology. But I do believe it is possible. So we run remotely all of our facilities. The key with it is having good people on site that are able to relay other parts of information back to you, and also again the service crew. So like having somebody that could fix the equipment when the problem arises is probably one of the most valuable people we have in any of these cultivations. The head grower and that person are like equal, because if the system doesn't run, we can't do anything. If that head grower isn't there to like identify issues and resolve some of the things and keep the system going, it's not going to happen. Like we still rely on runoff data. We need to have that information. There is no good automated piece for our scale. Again, like our scale is the key piece to this. We've tried a lot of things, but so far the most effective thing is just having everybody go in and do 3 or 4 runoff checks in a room, depending upon the size. Small is one runoff check, but usually if we have multiple genetics, we want a runoff check per genetic. But that allows us to kind of manage that. I think just timing, to answer your question.
100%. Stick to the basics, right? Mo's always preaching it. Runoff every day. We are looking at runoff, and dude, honestly, thank you for putting out all those videos from back in the day, Ramsey. I remember that one where you went to go do a runoff check, and you recorded, you're like, fuck, this one doesn't have runoff. I guess we'll come back tomorrow and do it again. But it showed us, right? You're going through the whole process. Every row has, if you're having your individual irrigation zones on your bays, then you should definitely be checking runoff on those specifically to make sure, A, Did the plants get watered, right? This is where Aroya and other sensing technologies are key. I want to make sure that the plants got watered. Sensors will never take away the human element. If I can walk into a room and I can feel that the climate feels off, and maybe there's a sensor uncalibrated. Don't want to name names, but there's plenty of sensors that just come out of calibration regularly. Weekly calibration checks, maybe once or twice a week, are minimum. So being able to ensure that that is a factor, we as cultivators, again, for our scale, I'm glad that you pointed that out, Ramsey, because there are manufacturers and technologies that already do a lot of these AI type of grows, right? The fully automated grows. But then there's the argument of quality, right? So we start to look at the balance of quality versus automation and where does that come into play. And I think one of the biggest things that you mentioned earlier that really stuck with me was when we start looking at automation, it's for me to scale and actually spend time, right? I want to be able to touch and look at every plant. If I can automate this task, I can now spend time with all the plants as a holistic view. And I think that's something that there's a misconception. Oh, you're trying to automate, you're going to lose quality. Well, if you do it correctly, you're going to actually give yourself better quality.
Yeah, I think that's the key. I don't care what scale you are. Even if you have one light in your house, if you could create a setup that controls the environment consistently where you could put in back-to-back crops and come out with a better product, it's going to make your tool sharper. You're going to be able to produce a better and better round of product, because the idea is that you take the result and you want to improve on it. You want to know if that improvement made a difference. But if you can't repeat the same thing over and over again, how will you ever know if you did anything different that was worthwhile? So like I think all of us as growers are, in this industry, I think the beautiful part about it is that we're craft. This is your craft. So like as a craftsman or craftsperson, because there's female growers out there as well, that we as people want to improve what we're doing. And I think that's the cool part about our industry is that we're so many MacGyvers. Farmers in general are MacGyvers. Like I've gotten the pleasure of working with veggie farmers and field crop farmers, and they're all MacGyvers. We're all figuring out how to make the system a little bit better, and that ingenuity is what is leading our industry to keep improving. It's amazing how much these worlds of cannabis are influencing even the world of vegetable production too, because they're learning a lot from our indoor experiences as some of these companies are moving indoors to kind of do what we're doing, but with vegetable production.
100% agree. And that was my takeaway when I was blessed to go to Amsterdam to the Green Tech conference this year. Traditional ag is more focused on scale and yield, while we're asking questions about quality first. And it was a bit of a back and forth, but there were certain manufacturers that are looking at deeper at quality. So, hey, I'm in cannabis. Okay, there was bright-eyed, bushy-tail opportunities at that moment, but you started to see that there was a lot of interest in quality focus first. So, great point there.
I think that's the best part about America right now. I have to say, traveling the world and going all over the place, we have the most unique opportunity right now because we have we are the most robust market for cannabis production in the world. So I think it's awesome that we get to engage with each other and share these stories and share what we're learning, because I believe that as a community, we will help advance things that will benefit the greater good of stuff. That's part of the interest in being a leader and trying to do something better. All of us as cultivators have an influence on one another. And so as we learn something, if you have that openness to share it with somebody else, so we can improve on it or test that theory out again, and do we get the same result, there's massive improvements for everybody. And I think that's the fun part about this is, sitting here talking amongst peers, coming to an event like this so we could learn from each other. That draws a lot of my interest right now, because somebody is going to create the next big thing. Aroya just came on not all that long ago. Grow Sense had been around, but this technology went from very, very, basic level to blew up very quickly. Working at Grodan was incredible to see how much people relied on that, and then seeing how everything is now encompassed to tech world. I don't think any one of us would have believed that we could remote control a facility if we were talking about this 10 years ago.
That is a great point, and I want to come back to that point about perspective from colleagues, right? Craig, you had the opportunity to speak on Salt Wars panel back in February, which was by far one of the best conversations that we've had on the CoNNect community, because over the past few years, people think that being a competitor in the same space is a bad thing, where we embrace it, right? That's what these wars are about. I mean, it's a stupid name that we call these light wars, salt wars. It's just something creative that we came up with, but it's really intended to create
Yeah,
perspective.
I don't support war.
Negative, sir. But we want to be able to bring the perspectives of different manufacturers. So I appreciate you guys being up here as nutrient manufacturers, as colleagues, and just to tease what's going on in the first week of December in Las Vegas. We are going to have a panel discussion every day at our booth, Grow World Connect, and it's going to be salt wars, light wars. We're going to start talking about substrate potentially here too, and then we're just going to bring back the reheat discussion. So independent notification versus reheat. So that's what we're about, guys. We're trying to educate, level up, and gain perspective because the world is watching. There's emerging markets that want help. They want to engage with us to figure out and ultimately grow better weed. Any final questions from the audience? Any final thoughts from our panelists?
No, I mean, keep innovating. I think let's see some innovations in terms of cooling. That's what I want to see next. Cooling, yeah. I mean, I have a lot of opinions on reheats. I won't share them right now because I want to create drama. But yeah,
we'll save them for Vegas.
Cooling needs to be figured out. I think that's a big problem that we have. It's a big contributor to global warming. We really need to figure out different mechanisms of cooling, and I think, again, the benefit of being in the cannabis industry, we have a lot of innovative people. I would love to see more geothermal and other means of cooling adapted into indoor cultivation, and then full recirculating systems. Big innovations. I want to see people drive towards this stuff. So let's take this to the next step and really bring green to an industry that boasts green. We really need to do a better job at reducing our footprint, so that way we have some sustainability brought into this.
Sustainable solutions at scale for the world.
I just want to throw a big shout out to Masonic. Thank you for bringing free seed day to the East Coast, dude. I don't know where he is, but
love you, Edgar.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was really nice to come up and talk and meet everybody.
Hey, shout out to our panelists. Big round of applause, everybody. Thank you for coming out to the CoNNect community. We got Ramsey, Craig, Noah, and Joe dropping game. Enjoy the rest of your day. And I got our grand prize. If you checked into the CoNNect today, you might be winning a Aroya Go system. Compliments of Aroya. So our winner is, of the Aroya Go system, Mr. Jonathan Bede. Jonathan Bede, if you're still here, that's okay. We have your information. You just won an Aroya Go system. Again, panelists, thank you guys so much. Appreciate you all. Until next time, much love.